The Montana sunrise spills gold across my family ranch cabin as I survey the 20 acres my grandfather left me. Weathered wood and wide porches speak of simpler times, when neighbors respected boundaries and land was sacred. I run my hand along the hand-hewn porch railing, feeling the grooves where Grandpa Joe carved his initials in 1943. This place represents everything I yearned for during 15 years of corporate meetings and artificial deadlines. When the attorney called about my inheritance 6 months ago, I could hardly believe it. The timing seemed impossibly perfect. The same week my divorce finalized, the same month my company announced another round of layoffs. I took it as a sign from the universe. I packed everything I owned into a U-Haul and drove 19 hours straight from Seattle to this little slice of Montana heaven. The cabin needed work, of course. Roof shingles curled at the edges from decades of snow and sun. The plumbing groaned and sputtered from disuse. But watching the morning mist roll over the eastern ridge, listening to the absolute silence broken only by birdsong, I knew I had made the right decision. This sanctuary would be worth every blister and splinter. I spend my days rebuilding what time has worn away. My hands, once soft from keyboard work, now callous from hammer and saw. Each board I replace connects me deeper to this land, to the generations that stood here before me. The property stretches across a gentle slope, bordered by white pines on 3 sides and a crystal creek to the west. Beyond the trees, mountains rise blue and ancient against the sky. My nearest neighbor, Tom Parker, lives half a mile down the dirt road. He stops by occasionally with fresh vegetables from his garden or advice about local contractors. Been seeing some new folks driving around, he mentioned one evening as we shared beers on the porch. All fancy SUVs with city plates. Someone said they were from that new development about 3 miles east. I hardly gave it a second thought. The fancy development called Whispering Pines had been built years ago, but it existed in a different world from my rustic homestead. Occasionally, envelopes appeared in my mailbox bearing their logo, but I tossed them aside without opening them. Probably just advertisements or welcome packets mistakenly delivered to the wrong address. Instead, I focused on my renovations. The eastern bedroom needed new flooring after winter moisture had warped the original planks. The kitchen cabinets required complete rebuilding. Each project consumed my savings but filled me with purpose. For the first time in decades, I slept deeply, exhausted from physical labor rather than emotional drain. One morning, I found another envelope from Whispering Pines wedged in my door frame. This one marked urgent in bold red letters. I almost threw it away with the others, but something made me tear it open. Inside, official-looking letterhead detailed violations of community standards, including unauthorized construction and aesthetic nonconformity. The letter demanded I cease all renovation activities until proper approval forms were submitted and reviewed. I laughed out loud at the absurdity. This property had stood independent for 8 decades. My grandfather built it before Whispering Pines was even a concept. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into my wood stove, watching the flames consume their presumption. Little did I know that simple act of defiance would trigger a battle that would consume the next year of my life. The pounding at my door comes early on a Saturday morning. The clock reads 7:15 a.m. as I stumble from bed, pulling on jeans and a flannel shirt. Through the window, I spot 2 men in pressed shirts standing on my porch, clipboards in hand. Their polished shoes look comically out of place on my muddy welcome mat. I open the door, coffee mug in hand, squinting against the morning light. The taller man speaks first, not bothering with introductions. We have received multiple complaints about unauthorized construction on this property, he announces, gesturing toward my newly rebuilt deck. His companion nods with practiced authority, jotting something on his clipboard. "Who exactly are you?" I ask, still foggy with sleep. "Brad Miller, compliance officer for Whispering Pines Community Association," the tall one replies. "And this is Jeffrey Simmons, our architectural review specialist. We need to discuss several violations we have observed on your property." I take a slow sip of coffee. I think there has been a misunderstanding. This property is not part of any homeowners association. The men exchange glances, and Brad pulls out a folded map from his breast pocket. "According to our records and boundary filings, your parcel falls within the expanded jurisdiction of Whispering Pines Community Association as of the 2021 revision." Cold disbelief washes over me. I know for a fact this property has ever been part of any association. My grandfather specifically purchased this land because of its independence from such restrictions. I feel like I have stepped into some bizarre alternate reality where strangers claim authority over my home. "I will need to see documentation proving that," I say firmly. "This property has been in my family for decades, long before your community existed." Their smiles tighten simultaneously. "We can provide that documentation to you. In the meantime, all construction must cease immediately until proper approval is obtained." Jeffrey hands me a thick packet of forms. These need to be submitted with detailed plans, material samples, and the review fee of $500. After they leave, I spend the morning making calls to the county record's office. They agree to see me that afternoon. The recording clerk, a gray-haired woman named Margaret, seems unsurprised by my story. She pulls the original property deeds and plat maps, spreading them across her desk. "Here are your boundaries, established 1943, she says, tracing the lines with a pencil. "And here is the Whispering Pines development, established 2019. No overlap whatsoever." I point to the map Brad showed me. They claim there was a boundary revision in 2021. Margaret frowns. "No such revision has been filed with this office, which would be legally required." She makes copies of all documents for me, official county seals stamped on each page. Despite this confirmation, certified letters continue arriving each week, each more threatening than the last. Citations for unapproved fencing, demands for architectural review, fines accumulating for regulations I never agreed to follow. $500 becomes $1,000, then $3,000 in alleged violations. My neighbor Tom warns me over our shared fence line one evening. They started with just the new subdivision, but every year they claim more territory. 3 families already sold rather than fight. His eyes drift to the pristine houses visible through the trees, their identical beige exteriors and perfect lawns, a stark contrast to our natural woodland properties. The Johnsons over on Creekside Road fought for months, but the legal fees bankrupted them. The situation escalates when Catherine Westfield herself appears in my driveway one afternoon. Her luxury SUV gleams in the sunlight, inappropriately spotless for our dirt roads. Designer sunglasses rest atop her perfectly highlighted hair. Everything about her exudes wealth and authority as she approaches me with a practiced smile. "Mr. Henderson," she says, using my grandfather's surname rather than my own. "I thought we might have a friendly chat about your property situation." Her smile never reaches her eyes as she explains how property values depend on uniformity and community standards. "We welcome your property into our association. We simply ask for compliance with our reasonable regulations." I show her the county records proving her claims false. "This property is not and has never been part of Whispering Pines. Your letters and fines have no legal basis." Something dangerous flashes across her face. the look of someone unaccustomed to hearing the word no. She composes herself quickly, but not before I glimpse the steel beneath her polished exterior. "I would hate to see this escalate to legal action," she says smoothly. "Our community has considerable resources at its disposal. Most residents find it easier to comply than to fight." The threat hangs in the air between us as she returns to her vehicle. Through my kitchen window that evening, I notice unfamiliar cars driving slowly past my property. Headlights sweep across my land well after midnight. I install security cameras the next day, unease settling into my bones like a cold Montana winter. 3 vehicles with flashing lights block my driveway as I return from town. My truck idles at the bottom of the gravel road as I process the scene before me. Men in dark uniforms with badges and sidearms surround my porch. From a distance, they look exactly like county sheriff deputies. Terror grips me as I wonder what could have possibly happened during my brief trip to the hardware store. I park behind the last vehicle and approach cautiously. Up close, I notice subtle discrepancies that send warning signals through my mind. The patches on their shoulders read Community Protection Services instead of County Sheriff. The vehicles lack official government markings, though their light bars and general appearance mimic police cruisers perfectly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I ask, clutching my shopping bag of plumbing supplies. The leader steps forward, hand resting ominously on his holster. "Are you the owner of this property?" His voice carries the practiced authority of law enforcement, but something feels off about the entire situation. When I confirm my identity, he nods to his companions. "We have orders to inspect Thai's property for code violations and safety hazards, as authorized by Whispering Pines Community Association." I feel blood rushing to my face. "This property is not part of Whispering Pines. You have no jurisdiction here." He pulls a document from his tactical vest. "This enforcement order gives us authority to conduct the inspection. Failure to comply constitutes obstruction." The document bears the Whispering Pines logo and lot of official-looking stamps, but no court seals or judge signatures. They cite HOA regulations as though reciting actual laws. The men fan out around my property, one heading toward my workshop, another examining my porch railing. "Stop right there," I call out. "You have no right to be on my property. I need to see actual badges and actual warrants." When I hesitate to let them enter my cabin, one of them attempts to push past me. His shoulder connects with mine, not quite hard enough to be assault, but clearly meant to intimidate. My hands shake as I pull out my phone and start recording. "I am requesting identification, badge numbers, and proper legal warrants," I say clearly into the camera. "Please state your names and legal authority for this inspection." Their practiced intimidation falters when faced with direct questions about jurisdiction. The leader keeps repeating phrases about community standards enforcement and contractual obligations, but avoids answering whether they have actual police authority. Neighbors emerge from nearby homes, watching silently from driveways and porches as voices escalate. I see Tom standing by his truck, phone to his ear. The tension feels electric, dangerous. One officer, no security guard, steps closer. "You are obstructing an official inspection. That carries potential arrest and additional fines." "You have no arrest powers," I respond, surprising myself with my certainty. "And I am calling the actual sheriff right now." The mention of real law enforcement changes the atmosphere immediately. The leader signals his team, and they regroup by their vehicles, speaking in hushed tones. Before departing, They slide an envelope under my door containing citations totaling $7,500 in fines, all for violations of regulations that have no legal bearing on my property. That night, I sit in darkness, watching headlights periodically sweep across my property. Sleep evades me completely. Each creak of the cabin settles like a gunshot in my nervous system. The violation feels visceral, as though my sanctuary has been permanently tainted. I call the actual sheriff's department the next morning. Deputy Wilson arrives promptly, notebook in hand, as I describe the incident and show him my security camera footage. "This is concerning," he says, frowning at the images of sued officers on my property. "What they are doing skirts dangerously close to impersonating law enforcement. The vehicles, the uniforms, the implied authority. It is all designed to confuse citizens." He takes detailed notes and copies of my footage. "We will investigate, but these situations can be complicated. The line between private security and impersonation can be legally murky." When he leaves, I feel no safer than before. The security company operates in a gray area, counting on confusion and intimidation rather than actual legal authority. Before dawn breaks the next day, I find myself searching online for attorneys specializing in property rights and HOA disputes. My dining table soon becomes covered with printouts of state impersonation statutes and property law references. I call my former colleague Simon, now a corporate attorney in Denver. "You need someone who specializes in this specific type of case," he advises after hearing my story. "This is not just about property boundaries. This involves potential fraud, intimidation, and impersonation of law enforcement." He emails me 3 names later that day. The first 2 attorneys listen politely to my story before explaining their retainer requirements. $10,000 upfront with hourly rates of $400 or more. Money I do not have after the cabin renovations. This is no longer about my deck or fence or property aesthetics. This is about reclaiming my safety and dignity. This is about standing up to systematic intimidation designed to exhaust ordinary people into submission. As another unfamiliar vehicle drives slowly past my cabin that evening, I make a decision. I will find someone to help me fight back, no matter what it takes. Attorney Claire Donovan listens intently in her modest office, surrounded by towering case files that spill from shelves onto every available surface. Unlike the slick corporate lawyers I contacted initially, she does not dismiss my story or check her watch every few minutes. "This is becoming an epidemic," she explains, pointing to a map on her wall marked with pins representing HOA boundary disputes across 3 counties. Red pins outnumber all others, concentrated around developing areas Ray rural meets suburban. Aggressive associations expand beyond their legal boundaries, counting on homeowners lacking the resources to fight back. Her office lacks the mahogany and marble of downtown firms, but Claire has something more valuable: passion and specialized experience. When I mention my financial concerns, she waves away my worry. "We can work on a contingency basis. If what you are telling me is accurate, we have multiple causes of action that could justify damages." Our discovery process begins immediately. Claire files initial paperwork asserting my property independence and challenging all fines and citations. More importantly, she subpoenas Whispering Pines records going back 10 years. What we unearth is disturbing. "Look at this," Claire says, spreading documents across her conference table one rainy afternoon. Whispering Pines has systematically expanded beyond its legal boundaries for 7 years, absorbing unincorporated properties through intimidation and falsified documentation. County records show striking discrepancies between their claimed territory and legal filings. Maps used by their compliance officers include properties never formally annexed into the association. More disturbing are the meeting minutes Claire subpoenas, revealing board discussions about territorial acquisition strategy and conversion of non-compliant parcels. They discuss properties like military targets, I observe, reading through highlighted sections where my own land is specifically mentioned. Because that is exactly how they see them, Claire responds. These are not typical community volunteers worried about property values. This is systematic expansion for profit. Each weekend becomes an investigation mission, knocking on doors, collecting testimonies from neighbors who faced similar tactics. Elderly Mr. Davidson sold his generational property after security vehicles parked outside his home for weeks, their headlights shining into his bedroom windows each night. The Millers capitulated after receiving $16,000 in fabricated fines that threatened their retirement savings. We collect affidavits from 16 former property owners, each describing nearly identical patterns of harassment and intimidation. We create timeline charts, boundary maps, and evidence binders. Security camera footage from multiple properties shows the same officers using the same tactics again and again. The pattern becomes clear. Whispering Pines targets properties with specific characteristics: water access, road frontage, or panoramic views. Properties that would be valuable for future development. My land checks all three boxes. Claire works evenings and weekends, charging far less than her services are worth. This is not just about your property, she explains during late-night strategy sessions at my cabin. This is about whether wealthy private organizations can fabricate authority and usurp individual rights. If they succeed here, the precedent affects everyone. We discover financial records showing Whispering Pines has contracted with developers for future expansion projects on land they do not yet own, including parcels that match the exact dimensions of my property. Claire believes this explains their aggressive timeline and tactics. They likely have contractual obligations with deadlines, she explains. Your resistance threatens not just their expansion, but potentially exposes them to breach of contract with developers. As we prepare court filings, Catherine Westfield makes her move. A settlement offer arrives via courier. They will waive all fines, approximately $23,000 at this point, if I simply acknowledge HOA jurisdiction over my property and comply with their regulations moving forward. This is actually good news, Claire says, examining the offer. They would not attempt settlement if they believed their position was legally strong. The ease with which they offer to waive such substantial fines only confirms what we now know. Their entire claim is built on sand. Their strategy depends on intimidation rather than legal standing. Most importantly, they fear public exposure of their methods. 2 days before our first scheduled court appearance, I receive another visitor. Brad Miller, the compliance officer from my first encounter, stands on my porch looking considerably less confident than before. "Mr. Henderson," he begins, using my grandfather's name again. "Ms. Westfield wanted me to convey that this situation has gotten out of hand. We value community harmony above all else. Perhaps we could discuss reasonable accommodations that would benefit everyone." I notice he carefully avoids mention of jurisdiction or boundaries. "All communication should go through my attorney," I respond, closing the door on his stammered reply. That night Claire calls with news. "Our judge assignment came through, Alina Martinez. This is excellent for us. She has a reputation for being meticulous." about property rights and due process. For the first time since this ordeal began, I feel a flicker of hope. The next morning, I rise before dawn and stand on my porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, just as it has for generations. Today, we fight back. The county courthouse stands imposingly as Claire, and I climb its stone steps. Built in 1912, its granite facade speaks of permanence and authority in a world where both seem increasingly rare. I feel small approaching its massive wooden doors, yet somehow fortified by its solidity, its promise of impartial justice. Inside, the contrast is striking. Our modest two-person team facing the HOA's phalanx of attorneys from Henderson and Walsh, the largest firm in the state. They occupy the entire left side of the courtroom, 6 lawyers in expensive suits flanked by paralegals and assistants. Claire and I sit alone on the right, our evidence organized in 3 cardboard boxes compared to their dozen leather briefcases and rolling document carts. "Do not let the theatrics intimidate you," Claire whispers. "Numbers mean nothing here. Evidence is what matters." Judge Eleanor Martinez enters promptly at 9. Her silver hair frames a face that misses nothing, eyes sharp as she surveys the room. She begins proceedings without ceremony, calling for opening statements. The HOA's lead counsel, Richard Walsh, approaches the podium with confident strides. "Your Honor, this case represents a simple matter of community standards and contractual obligations. The plaintiff purchased property within Whispering Pines' jurisdictional boundaries, yet refuses to acknowledge community regulation designed to maintain property values and neighborhood integrity." He speaks for 20 minutes, his polished delivery making their position sound not just reasonable but inevitable. Claire takes notes calmly beside me, occasionally highlighting documents in our binders. When her turn comes, she approaches the podium with simple directness. "Your Honor, this case is about fabricated authority, fraudulent boundary claims, and systematic intimidation. The evidence will show that Whispering Pines has orchestrated a calculated scheme to absorb independent properties through deception and harassment, including impersonation of law enforcement officers." Judge Martinez leans forward slightly, her interest visibly piqued by this final claim. The HOA attorneys shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. Their legal team comes prepared with motions seeking immediate dismissal on technicalities and jurisdiction questions. Judge Martinez denies each with growing irritation at their procedural games. "This court will hear the evidence before ruling on jurisdictional matters," she announces firmly. When I take the stand, Claire guides me through my testimony methodically. The courtroom falls completely silent during playback of my security camera footage showing the fake officers attempting forced entry. We present the citations they left, the threatening letters, and county documentation proving my property independence. Richard Walsh attacks my credibility on cross-examination, his tone suggesting I manufactured controversy for attention. "Is it not true that you have repeatedly refused reasonable requests to discuss these matters with association representatives?" "I refuse to acknowledge their non-existent authority over my property," I respond. "That is different from refusing discussion." His smug confidence falters when Claire presents enlarged copies of the falsified boundary maps. Our expert witness, a county surveyor with 30 years' experience, methodically dismantles their territorial claims using historical markers and satellite imaging to demonstrate the deliberate encroachment. The boundary markers clearly show the Henderson property has never been incorporated into any planned development, he testifies, pointing to survey stakes dating back to my grandfather's original purchase. The HOA attorneys object repeatedly, but Judge Martinez overrules them each time. The court wishes to understand the full factual background, she states firmly. The pivotal moment comes on day 3 when former HOA board member Sarah Jenkins takes the stand. A small woman in her 60s, she nervously adjusts her glasses before addressing the court. Claire gently leads her through questions about internal HOA discussions regarding my property. Catherine called it the cornerstone property, Sarah testifies, avoiding Westfield's glare from across the courtroom. She said once we established precedent there, the rest would fall like dominoes. The HOA attorneys object strenuously, but Judge Martinez allows the testimony. Sarah describes board meetings where properties were categorized by acquisition difficulty and development potential. My property topped both lists. Judge Martinez removes her glasses during the testimony of James Reeves, the HOA security chief responsive for the fake police incident. Her questions becoming increasingly pointed about their policies regarding uniforms, vehicles, and presentation of authority. So your officers intentionally wear uniforms resembling law enforcement, drive vehicles with light bars similar to police cruisers, and carry badges, despite having no actual law enforcement authority, she asks. We maintain a professional security presence, he responds evasively. That was not my question, Mr. Reeves, Judge Martinez says sharply. By day 4, the atmosphere has shifted palpably. The HOA attorneys huddle frequently during breaks, passing notes with growing urgency. Their witnesses contradict each other about boundary revisions and enforcement protocols. Their documentation shows inconsistencies that Claire highlights relentlessly. Judge Martinez peers over her bench at their legal team during one particularly contradictory exchange. I find myself deeply troubled by what appears to be a pattern of deliberate misrepresentation and intimidation. The HOA's expensive legal team begins looking less confident with each passing hour. During afternoon recess, I overhear 2 of their attorneys arguing in hushed tones near the water fountain. We were told this would be straightforward, one hisses. You said the documentation was solid. Claire squeezes my arm as we return to our table. They are cracking, she whispers. Their house of cards is collapsing. But Richard Walsh has one final strategy. That afternoon, he calls Catherine Westfield herself to the stand. Immaculately dressed in a conservative navy suit, she projects absolute confidence as she takes the oath. Walsh leads her through prepared testimony about community values, property standards, and the HOA's commitment to neighborhood integrity. Our only concern has always been maintaining the character and value of our community, she testifies smoothly. We extend the same protections and benefits to all properties within our boundaries. Claire watches silently, making occasional notes. When Walsh finishes his carefully choreographed direct examination, he returns to his seat with a satisfied expression. The judge turns to Claire. Your witness, counselor. Claire approaches the podium unhurriedly, carrying a single manila folder. Ms. Westfield, before we begin, I would like to establish your role beyond the Homeowners Association. You are also CEO of Westfield Development Corporation. Is that correct? Catherine's perfect composure shows its first tiny crack as Claire opens the folder. The real battle is about to begin. The courtroom erupts when Claire presents emails obtained through discovery, communications between Catherine Westfield and Platinum Ridge developers, dated 2 years before her first contact with me. Claire projects the most damning message onto the courtroom screen. Once all parcels are under HOA control, We can proceed with acquisition and rezoning, Westfield wrote to developers. Particularly valuable is the old Henderson property with water rights and mountain views. My grandfather's land, my home, reduced to an acquisition target in cold corporate language. The HOA attorneys object vehemently, but Judge Martinez overrules them after Claire demonstrates the emails came directly from their own document production. The court finds these communications relevant to the question of motivation and jurisdiction. Judge Martinez states firmly, financial disclosures reveal Catherine Westfield holds a 40% ownership stake in the development company, standing to gain millions from the luxury community planned for our lands. Claire methodically connects the dots between the HOA's aggressive expansion and Westfield's personal financial interests. Did you disclose your financial interest in acquiring these properties to the HOA board? Claire asks. Catherine shifts in her seat. That information was not relevant to association business. Not relevant, Claire repeats incredulously. You were directing HOA resources, including legal counsel and security personnel, to pressure property owners to sell land that would directly benefit your development company. Before Catherine can respond, Claire introduces board minutes showing Catherine repeatedly voted on matters directly affecting properties targeted for acquisition, without disclosing her conflict of interest. The revelations continue when former HOA manager Timothy Reeves takes the stand. A nervous man with thinning hair, he describes internal procedures that shock even those of us who suspected the worst. We had a weekly meeting called Expansion Strategy, he testifies, voice barely audible. Properties were rated by acquisition value and resistance potential. He describes how Catherine personally instructed staff to shred documents that contradicted their boundary claims and create false violation records for targeted properties. His department maintained two separate maps: the legally filed boundaries and the operational boundaries, used by compliance officers. Ms. Westfield told us to proceed as though the expanded boundaries were already approved, he testifies. She said legal would catch up with operations later. The humanity behind these clinical strategies emerges through testimony from victims. Elderly Mrs. Patterson describing sleepless nights after security vehicles parked outside her home, their spotlights sweeping across her bedroom windows until she agreed to HOA terms. The Edwards family, bankrupted by defending against fabricated violations, eventually selling their three-generation family farm for 30% below market value to a shell company later revealed to be controlled by Westfield Development. Judge Martinez's expression darkens with each testimony. By the afternoon of day 5, she has abandoned her usual judicial neutrality, asking pointedly specific questions of HOA witnesses. Catherine Westfield returns to the stand for redirect examination, attempting to reestablish her composed persona. Richard Walsh tries desperately to steer testimony back to community standards and property values, but the damage is irreparable. When Claire cross-examines her again, the facade crumbles completely. Did you personally direct security personnel to present with police-like authority at my client's property? Claire asks, referencing an email projected on the screen. Catherine hesitates, realizing she is cornered by her own written instructions. I advised them to project appropriate authority to ensure compliance. Appropriate authority they did not actually possess, correct? These people do not understand the greater good, Catherine snaps suddenly, gesturing dismissively toward me. Their selfish individuality hurts everyone's property values. The collective intake of breath in the courtroom signals the turning point. Her mask has finally dropped, revealing the contempt underlying her actions. Judge Martinez makes a note, her expression grave. The final blow comes when Claire introduces Westfield Development marketing materials dated 18 months earlier, showing conceptual drawings for Mountain View Estates, luxury homes, and a golf course mapped directly over existing properties, including mine. Properties they did not own but clearly intended to acquire through their systematic pressure campaign. As Catherine steps down from the witness stand, her expression has transformed from confident authority to barely contained fury. I catch her glance toward me, a look of such pure hatred that it momentarily takes my breath away. Claire squeezes my arm. "That is the look of someone who has just lost everything," she whispers. "The judge sees it too." As Day 5 concludes, Judge Martinez announces she will issue her ruling the following morning. The courtroom empties slowly, spectators discussing the revelations in hushed, shocked tones. Catherine and her legal team exit without acknowledging anyone, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. That night I barely sleep, replaying testimony in my mind. By dawn, I stand on my porch watching the sunrise, wondering if this will be one of my last mornings on my grandfather's land or the first day of true security in my home floor. Judge Martinez's ruling reverberates beyond the courtroom walls. Her voice carries clearly through the packed chamber as she delivers her decision. This court finds Whispering Pines HOA engaged in systematic fraud, harassment, and illegal impersonation of law enforcement, she begins, her expression severe. The evidence presents one of the most disturbing abuses of fabricated authority this court has witnessed in 22 years on the bench. The judgment includes treble damages for affected homeowners, totaling over $4.2 million. She orders dissolution of current HOA leadership and appointment of a court monitor to oversee elections of new board members. Most significantly, she refers Catherine Westfield and 3 board members for criminal investigation regarding the impersonation of law enforcement officers and document falsification. The court further finds board members who knowingly participated in this scheme personally liable for damages, as their actions clearly exceed the scope of protected board activities. Judge Martinez continues. Catherine Westfield stares straight ahead, her perfect composure finally shattered as the judge speaks. Her attorneys look equally stunned, having clearly expected their resources and connections to prevail regardless of evidence. Outside, news cameras capture the moment as dozens of affected property owners gather on the courthouse steps. Claire addresses the media briefly, emphasizing the precedent this case establishes for property rights and association accountability. I stand beside her, still processing the magnitude of our victory. This began as one man's fight for his family land, Claire tells reporters. It exposed a systematic abuse of power that affected dozens of families and threatened the very concept of property rights. What began as my personal battle has awakened the community to collective action. Within weeks, we established the Rural Property Rights Coalition, creating legal resources for others facing similar battles across the country. My once peaceful cabin becomes weekend headquarters for neighbors drafting protective covenants, not to control each other, but to prevent future developers from dividing us. The settlement funds allow 3 elderly neighbors to reclaim properties they were forced to sell under duress. The court invalidates those sales, finding them products of fraud and intimidation. Mrs. Patterson returns to her family farmhouse, tears streaming down her face as neighbors help move her belongings back home. Spring arrives with communal barn-raising energy as we help rebuild fences and structures that had been sited and dismantled under false authority. Neighbors who once watched silently now work side by side, reclaiming not just property but community bonds. Local and national media coverage of our case prompts state legislative hearings on HOA regulation and oversight. I testify before lawmakers about the need for clear jurisdictional boundaries and enhanced penalties for misrepresentation of authority. The land breathes differently now, as though relieved of an invisible weight. Standing on my grandfather's porch one evening, watching children from neighboring properties playing freely in adjoining meadows, I understand that some boundaries exist not to divide, but to protect what matters most, not just property rights, but our fundamental dignity and community bonds. Catherine Westfield's development company quietly dissolves its local holdings, selling parcels back to original owners at reduced prices as part of the settlement. The threatening letters have stopped. In their place, my mailbox now collects invitations to neighbor gatherings and community planning meetings based on mutual respect rather than control. Tom Parker stops by with fresh tomatoes from his garden, just as he did before this ordeal began. "You know what the strangest part is," he says as we share beers on my porch. "I almost sold out too. Watching you fight made me remember why my grandfather chose this land in the first place. The victory was never about winning against them, but about preserving something far more valuable than property values: the right to define home on our own terms."